So for the first question, we wanted to provide like a context on where we're at. So what we wanted to talk about, it's basically the fact that one of the challenging aspects of transportation projects is that they extend over a very long timeline. So with Blue Line Coalition was formed, and I am helping leading the Blue Line Coalition. I am a coalition organizer with the Alliance. But with Blue Line, it was formed almost like 10 years ago. So that just gives you a quick glimpse of like what a long history this coalition has. And then because of the complexity and different jurisdictions, we often don't know where projects stand or where values or issues as advocates for racial equity and justice align. As a way to give folks a bit of an update on the projects we're discussing here today, could you share when and how you came into the Rondo Land Bridge or the Blue Line Extension project? And how would you define this moment for the projects that you're working on? Is there anyone that would like to go first?
I can start. Good morning, everyone. Denise Butler here. I'm the Director of Economic Development at ACER. And ACER is African Career Education and Resource Inc. I've been with the organization since about 2012 now. And when I started, we were rightfully so engaging folks in the Northwest suburbs around the upcoming Blue Line extension. And that engagement was going to decide if the route was going to go through Brooklyn Park and or the weather was going to go to Maple Grove. And when I came into that conversation, my community, predominantly majority BIPOC community out here in the Brooklyns, they was like, so what? A train? Okay. What is that going to do? And as we begin to engage folks more and more, we understand about, we got to learn about the various inequities that come along with transportation. We got really familiar with the history of the Rondo community. And we were smack in what became a lawsuit on the Green Line for community of color to get 2 extra stops, because the stops were going to the route was going to bypass them because it was going to make it too slow to pick up folks that really, really needed the transportation. And so we fast forward, I thought we were successful in getting this line. I felt we were successful in the way the route was going. And we were excited about all the opportunities, a $1.5 billion project that will yield another $9 billion of investment. And, we've been excited about a lot of the policies we've been pushing and trying to pass. However, all of that came back to hit us. I would say full circle, unfortunately, here this month. Yep, this month. Learning last year that negotiations were not going to continue with BNSF and what that could potentially mean for the route or the line. And then coming this March, learning what are some of the potential new routes. And just going to leave us there and say that community has a voice. Community has been at the table for been at the table for over a decade on this Blue Line extension work. And community is not going to sit by and watch what may be trying to happen. And we're not going to sit by and be silent to some of the hidden agendas that seems to be populating around the new movement for the Blue Line extension. Thank you.
Wow. Certainly happy to jump in, and I appreciate the connection to some of the early work in the Central Light Rail Corridor that many folks have been tied to, and how it transfers over into the work on the Blue Line. So my name is Keith Baker. I'm the Executive Director for ReConnect Rondo. And so the work that I am able to kind of celebrate and talk about really started well before I came to the table. So that tells you how long it takes for something to emerge. The idea of a CAP or a land bridge emerged in 2009. And that was around the discussion that was going on and associated with the early work around the Central Light Rail Corridor. At that time, I worked for the Department of Transportation myself. So I've spent 18 years with the Department of Transportation. And my office, though not directly involved, we we were pretty clear with the role of Met Council in the right-of-way activities for that project, because my office had managed the light rail right-of-way contracts for Hiawatha. So just to kind of bring the connective tissues together a bit. One of the things that's really clear, these things have a lot of layers to them. And because I was fortunate enough to understand a bit about transportation planning, project development, and funding and those kinds of things, it provides every bit of opportunity for me to use all of that experience as we're working on creating this African-American cultural enterprise district that's connected to an asset that belongs to transportation right now. The challenge is always how are you able to leverage it in the interest of community? Well, there are things called certainly the STIP and the TIP and the CHIP and so many other acronyms that are used that just cause extraordinary confusion without people really understanding 10-year plans, 4-year plans, city 20-year plans, how does that tie to transportation, all those things. So some projects can be worked on. I'll use the St. Croix Bridge project just as an illustration. It took 25 years for that bridge to come about. So even the work that we're all doing today, sometimes the project never emerges, even though there are some early thoughts and planning around it, because, for a wide range of reasons. So where we are with Rondo at this moment, and what really makes this really powerful moment for us all, is that really this is kind of a community-driven proposition, even though we see it in the hands of MnDOT in terms of the process and the owner. What we often say for ReConnect Rondo is we're in a very, very challenging. So at this point, ReConnect Rondo is asking for pre-development resources at the legislature. We're the ones having conversations at the national level in terms of resources, given the discussions going on in the Biden administration. Now, it doesn't mean that we've done everything right, because we certainly haven't, but we have positioned the project toward community benefits. We've just set the conditions. We've got to next continue and expand our relationship building within the ecosystem, because that's fundamentally going to be important as this thing moves forward. So I'll rest there and just thank you for the opportunity to share kind of where we're at.
I can go next. Thanks, Keith. Hi, everyone. My name is Kanani Omar. I am a housing organizer at Harrison Neighborhood Association. That Harrison Neighborhood is located in North Minneapolis, and we are also part of the Blue Line Coalition. So I am fortunate enough to be working with Denise and Ricardo closely as we kind of navigate where we are with the Blue Line. For context, I entered my position at Harrison and in my role at the Blue Line back in August. So at the time, we had my first few weeks there, we had residents who had just finished doing picking out different artwork for station planning. This is how close, this is how real the project was for the community. They were literally picking out the artwork that would be down the street from them. So when this sudden shift to we may not get the light rail, things are looking kind of murky happened, it was definitely a shock to the community members, especially at this after years and years of engagement. So that move and that shift to we're going to be looking at different routes brought a lot of conversations that were painful for community members. I being new to the table, had to kind of look at this whole project in the lens of going back in time to really understanding how we got here. And I had learned that this Blue Line extension project along Olson Highway was an attempt actually at restorative justice. This was an attempt to bring in infrastructure and investments to a community that was harmed from the Olson Highway destruction that happened decades ago. Harrison was essentially isolated from the rest of North Minneapolis, and every year we have people who are hurt or killed just trying to cross that highway to get to their neighbors and family members. So in terms of restorative justice, equity, as we re-begin of where the routes go, I think it's going to be difficult for Harrison members, for Northside community members to really have trust in these conversations unless we take the time to step back and think about the harm that's already been caused. With the zoning changes, with the investors lining up in Harrison after the first route announcement, many neighbors saw people who were forced out of their homes. And with the new developments that are taking place, we're seeing our community, which was dominantly a Black neighborhood, become whiter, become wealthier. And it feels as though this community engagement when it comes to transit development is having residents design their own displacement. It's just a way for the facade of listening is happening here, because people in Harrison have designed their own displacement despite having concerns at the table of, I want to make sure I'm here when this light rail comes. So as we move forward, I know HNA as well as the Blue Line Coalition really want to center anti-displacement policies, regardless of where the route goes. And we look forward to having more conversations and actually learning about the ReConnect Rondo and the Rondo experience to make sure that community is centered.
Wow. Okay. We got a short time, so I think we got part of our planning. We want to go to small groups. What all the speakers are basically saying is everything takes time, but the moment we are in right now is, I would like to think of it as an enchanting, magical time where we all realize not only are we standing on shoulders, but we are, I love that quote about we are the wildest dreams of our ancestors. So we know the stories, we know the stories. And sometimes we just get so distracted because we want to share those stories, of both cities. And it's not just both cities, it's all across the country, and right now that's the magical time. It's like things are being revealed, and it just depends on, your time period. We do have a video, and I would like to show that video because I like what Kanani said. We have to go back in time. We all have to be time travelers, the whole green line. And actually, I like to tell people, excuse me, my name is Melvin. I'm a peacemaker. I'm with the Urban Farm and Gardening Alliance. So I grow food, okay? And in Rondo, we are greening. Green is not just for food, but we are building wealth. Our time period right now is about healing. Our time period right now is about restorativeness. Our time period is about thinking about reparations in a whole different way. So that blue line, the land bridge, it's about reparations, no doubt. It's about restorativeness. It's about healing our trauma. It's about being the best we can. But that green line, when it started, and that was back in the late 90s, they was calling it Central Corridor. But we have folks like over at Frogtown Farm. We have folks like at Frogtown Neighborhood Association, the Summit University. They start talking green, 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 green. All of a sudden, it went from the Central Corridor to the green line, And the city, the county, the metro is owning that. We have to start owning we are in a time period where we are creating our story. I like the way Denise said it. We know what's happening now. We're going to keep going forward. So I'm going to ask Ricardo or Carolyn just to show this very quick. It's 3 minutes. You probably all have seen it, but as a farmer, as a gardener, we always are cultivating. You always have to till that soil, but we have to till the soul, our soul. That's what needs to be tilled. That's what needs to be healed. So let's watch that for a moment, please.
Just to check, can folks see the video screen about to play?
Yes.
Yeah.
War area, and we survived it. And we survived it because we were strong. We survived it because we were community. Every time you walked down the street, you knew, everybody knew who you were.
I can remember Tiger Jack was like the favorite place for me to go. And his store was right there where 94 was at, on 94 and Dale.
So, Rondo, Beyond the Pavement, oh, this has been a journey. So, one thing that I would say that, and something that I would say was the most important to me was bridging that generational gap.
And how it connects now and future. It also brought up feelings of our current state of the neighborhoods changing drastically, and it made me really wish there was longer of a movie than what it was. It really is.
And I look at the economic loss, and when you come out into not just this community, but in a lot of ways the United States, you don't see it highlighted that black folks are business-minded. And you hear Ms. Williams say we were so self-sustaining that we had our own ambulance.
But man, if you see this film, movie, document, I would just say it's award-winning.
My father lost his home on St. Anthony when they first started purchasing homes for the highway. So he just left. He had a home near Dale and St. Anthony. So he left because he said they had a scare tactic with a crane over one of the neighbors' homes.
My spirit was touched to find out, what really happened.
I had just turned 16, and my parents were in the kitchen crying. And I knew that it was something serious because my parents had only cried 4 times.
This is what we've done. Rondo exists in the memory of the old and in the imagination of the young. And for that demonstration of it, I will forever be grateful for the sons and the daughters and the ancestors of our community that were destroyed for the work that you've done. You have made a tremendous, tremendous contribution to the solidification of this idea of community, of place, of memory, of culture, and you've made me so very proud to see this right around. Feed it. Put more brush on it. Keep it going. Keep it going. Keep it going. To keep the memory of Rondo alive until such time that it is in the imagination of the young.
Yes.
The imagination of the young. Keep it going, keep it going, keep it going. That's Mr. Rondo. Most folks know him as Mr. Marvin Anderson. With Mr. Anderson and Mr. Smaller Floyd, who started, waking up. That Robin Hickman likes to say, they thought we were seeds, so they crushed us, but they didn't know we were seeds. Mr. Anderson and a whole team of folks, that particular video, what I like about it, even though you couldn't hear it probably that well, it was very intergenerational. It was young high schoolers from the recording arts who produced that video a couple years ago. And now it's time for a new one. And we are part of that story. It's time for the Blue Line story. And those are what has brought me to this place. And we have so many different ways of expressing, but the main thing we have to do is just start talking to each other. As Carolyn mentioned earlier, we're going to try to break out these silos and just work together. And we have to work from our heart. And we just have to stop trying to work the way they want us to. We have to start working in our natural flow. So let's go to the next question, Ricardo, please.
Thanks, Melvin. Yeah, that's great. Very powerful. And yeah, welcome back to this century where not many things have changed, maybe some names, but the struggles continue. And yeah, we keep going for sure. So for this one, that's what it's all about. It's like, what are we doing today about it, right? So the impact of who has the political power to make policy and project decisions is so clear in transportation planning. Rondo was demolished by I-94 because white people had the political influence to preserve their neighborhoods. People are currently being displaced from Harrison in North Minneapolis because city zoning policies favor developers and anti-displacement measures have not been prioritized. No matter how long we sing the same song, they have not been prioritized. So the question for our wonderful panelists today is, what are the narratives or policies that you're putting front and center to ensure active community benefit in these projects now, not 30 years from now once the damage is done?
Yeah, well, I'll jump in. Again, I want to thank Melvin for grounding us. I mean, I just appreciate him so much. He's a product of Rondo, and I'm a transplant in, so to speak, in spirit, because I don't currently live in Rondo, but I do live in Rondo because my time is there. You know, such powerful questions each of them are, and in their own right, you know, can dive deeply. 4 things that we keep in mind. We're always trying to make a technical case because there are people who understand technical things. We're constantly trying to make a business case because there was loss transactionally, and there's opportunity for gains transactionally, but it goes beyond that because there's a value set also that is the overarching. We're ensuring that we're making a moral case. The loss was extraordinary. The tactics, the strategies were extraordinary and had unimaginable impacts that are sustained today. And then a just case. This is about justice as well. This is about fairness. And for the Rondo story, I mean, I'm the inheritor of much of what people have kind of centered and been able to gather to this point. But quantifying things is so important. Defining your narrative is so important. Otherwise, it will be defined for you. And Rondo experienced a 48% homeownership decline, a 61% population decline overall. Rondo represents what people call an opportunity zone because there's a very low medium income that exists there. But I think oftentimes we're defined by the absence or perception of absence rather than the assets that exist within our communities. And we certainly have assets or those things that bind us. So I think it's going to be vital, and I've said this a little bit earlier, for the blue line, in terms of the timetable, where is there opportunity to seize given where you are in your timetable? For Rondo, we're ahead of the curve considerably, so we're defining it up front, you know, but it's not easy. Because people are carrying a lot of pain body from history and trying to help people understand how to use these, what I call systems, processes, tools, and resources when they're attached to institutions that have created harm. it's very difficult to detach those technical pieces from the institution that is responsible for the conditions of our community. But I do think that it's extraordinarily important to look at these systems, processes, tools, and resources as assets also that can be used for community, because they can be used for community. And so I'm just so anxious to hear more about the Blue Line, and anxious to share a bit more about Rondo, because I do think there's an opportunity for shared learning, shared benefit, and shared outcomes. We've got to attach our movement to other movements, to be honest. And we've been fortunate enough to at least pave somewhat of a way, that can be at least spoken about and shared.
I guess I can go. So systems and policies, and where do we come in? We talk about being proactive versus being reactive. And so we need to be more proactive. We was proactive in deciding what this route was going to look like. We should have been proactive in making sure that it happened in the time frame that it was supposed to happen. And because we missed that memo, we need to stop waiting for memos as community. We need to stop waiting for memos. And when we talk about policy, and, Caroline kind of, hinted in the direction that white communities get what they want because they help to create those policies. Policies are not accidental. They're intentional. And it doesn't take a politician to create policies. It doesn't take government staff to create policies. It happens outside of those spaces, actually. It happens in the communities. It happens in the communities that are empowered to do so. And it happens in the communities who are proactive around what they want their community to look like, what they want to have in their community, and even who they want to have in their community. And because all those proactive measures are being put in place, time and time, the system continues to work for those folks. The system is designed to work for the folks that have been proactive in helping to create the policies. And those folks are the community. And those folks have largely historically been the white community. And so I say BIPOC communities, we don't need to wait for the county or Governor Walz's administration to tell us when the Blue Line is going to finally be built. We don't need to tell us where the route should go. We should be deciding whether it's West Broadway, whether it's Lowry, and not just where the route should go. We should be deciding what are some of the future developments that we want. Right now, we should be making those decisions and not waiting for somebody to bring us to a meeting, to bring us to basically bring us around their agenda. That's what they do. They call us to bring us around their agenda that they've already created. And I want to just continue to reiterate and ask that when we're creating things, that there's a timeline for change. That's who we have to be proactive in. If we don't want it to take 25 years, we need to have a timeline for change, and know that things does not have to take that long to happen. I remind people in the midst of COVID, somewhere, somehow, our government was able to release $2.9 trillion in March into this economy. And so when we're proactive about what that policy is, we're proactive about that timeline of change, we're going to get exactly what we want.
Everything that I'm hearing from everyone really resonates well. And Melvin, you're not work the way they want us to is absolutely, I think, how community needs to move forward. To Denise's point, for me, being the time traveler, looking back on some of these comments from over a decade ago, at least with Harrison, it was very explicit that they did not want to lose their homes. That was something that was stated. The asks in terms of these investments were things like sidewalks that actually finish, because we have sidewalks in Harrison now that are not finished, that stop in the middle of the street. And the promise was, when this investment comes, we'll fix all your sidewalks. When this investment comes, you're a food desert, we're going to make sure you're going to get a grocery store. All of these things that really a community should have anyways were suddenly tied to this project. So as it has now become clear this project is not coming, I think the conversation needs to be, now that it's acknowledged we don't have sidewalks that finish, and we don't have a grocery store, and we don't have everything that a community needs to be a safe and sustainable ecosystem, how are you going to fix that harm that you've helped create? With the announcement of the Blue Line, we have had about 500 units added to the Harrison neighborhood, and only 28 of them are affordable to people who live there now. So those units were not built for Harrison community. Those units were not built for the Northside community. So as the conversation moves forward and we think about opportunities, what I would like to see, and I think Harrison residents and Northsiders would like to see too, is an explicit dedication and framework of who you're talking about when we're saying opportunity. Who is this light rail for? And who are these opportunities for? Are we talking about opportunities for investors with deep pockets? Are we talking about opportunities for development? Are we talking about closing the disparities between home ownership in North Minneapolis? Are we talking about, we know, to Denise's point with COVID, Hennepin County has a tracker of who's receiving rental assistance in what communities. We know there's a lot of people who need help in North Minneapolis. So as we talk about development, what type of housing options are we offering? Are we going to continue to bring in apartments that we know they can't afford, or are we going to be really intentional in the design of this? So community, before we even talk about ROD options, I would like to see an explicit promise, an explicit framework. This is about racial equity. This is a restorative project. Because I think if we get that explicitly, not implied, not privately with maybe some staff members or elected leaders, a public stance, this is a restorative project, I think it will allow the community to be bold and actually maybe have a little bit more trust that their conversations will be taken seriously. It's a pivotal time right now. I don't think in terms of the Blue Line, it's too late. I think right now it's just a time for us to get organized and be clear about how we want to move forward.
If I can just jump in and just really celebrate what you're saying so much. It's never too late. No matter how people think it is, it's not. The question really boils down to, at what cost? You know, always. And for those who know me, very rarely do I articulate things like that. I'm a bit more diplomatic. But I do think it is important, and I particularly appreciate your pointing out, who are we saying are going to be the primary beneficiaries? Who are going to be the secondary beneficiaries? And who are going to be the tertiary beneficiaries? That is so important. It's okay for all of those to benefit. Let's, because we all live in a community, right? And we want the quality of life to be raised for everyone. But it can't be solely in the interest of business and development, because they've often been the primary beneficiaries. The system is built for them to be the beneficiaries. It has to be different. And I think at the Rondo project, we knew that coming out of the jump. We didn't necessarily know the how, okay, but we knew the what was necessary. And so just thank you for laying it out the way that you did. primary, secondary, and tertiary beneficiary matters. And defining that up front is important. And having all policies driven to get to that outcome is really imperative.
Thank you, Keith. And I just wanted to keep building on that. I am sharing on the chat right now the Blue Line Coalition website, where our policies are currently hosted as they are. I did start the conversation saying that this conversation is great timing. It's incredible to see all the similarities between the two projects. And also, we're updating all of this information in light of the changes. So we actually have a meeting next week. So some of the info might change as you see it today. But I do wanted to share those policies in there. Blue Line Coalition also carries a equitable development scorecard and principles, which is another tool that we are pushing forward to help ensure that community benefits directly from these developments and is not displaced. So I wanted to jump into the question 3, which is specifically at something we've been addressing from the beginning, which is how do we kind of like break silos, right? So during our conversation that we had before the meeting today, Keith did bring something up and said something around how the leaders in transportation spaces are in a dark room looking for a light switch, right? So they have us operating under those circumstances. And we talk about preventing or addressing harm in our communities. We know the investments can bring a bright future. So for the panelists, what are the ways you see us breaking down silos between projects and across communities to engage in powerful, life-affirming ways around transportation?
I'm going to say, I love when I hear the word, we got to be bold. We got to be strong. You know, we got to be. You know, I just got reminded of that yesterday. You know, that song, we have to have that in our head constantly. So thank you, Kana. We have to be bold. On this participant list right now, we have some folks who work for the state. We have some folks who work for the city, for the county. You know, sometimes we act like we don't even know who we are. We all know what's happening right now. That's why we have to be bold. We have to take that step. You know, we got to take that step what John Lewis was talking about. We got to take the step that Kamala Harris right now is talking about. We know she will be the first woman president. She will be the first woman of color. She will be. You know, we don't have to say, will she or whatever. She will be. Stuff is happening for us right now in the Twin Cities. Ricardo mentioned the scorecard. Many of us has been coming to these meetings year after year after year, doing the same thing. I recall, for instance, the Rondo project is moving really far ahead. And we had one of those, what you call it, Keith, the ULN, the UNL?
ULN.
Yeah, you know, those people on the top coming here. On the same day, we had a scorecard workshop. One of those photos you seen was Rick. We have to stop being distracted. And again, and we have to do it with no apology to the county, to the state, to the city. What we are talking about is, again, I'm going to say different forms of reparations. Justice, I think he said, is all about social justice. The Blue Line, yeah, we want to learn more about it. When we talk about the Rondo land bridge, we're talking about creating a whole new piece of land, a whole new green space, whole new playgrounds, whole new greenhouses, whole new outdoor theaters. And that's really just a drop in the bucket. We have to connect everything. And one of the things we need to start connecting, and I really want to urge all of us, we talking about honoring people. We want to honor Rick, but man, we got to honor the First Nation people. And the first place we need to start right now is that pipeline. If we can get some policies, and I think we all are saying we have to create the policies. Can you feel that quantum shift? If all of a sudden somebody said, well, no, it's about climate change, it's about the future, it's the youth. So maybe why don't we just start putting that pipeline inside Bismarck or some other place? I think people start waking up very quickly. The same way that COVID, how they was able to come up with the vaccination so fast. The pipeline is a virus and they can heal that fast. So breaking down these silos, we can do it joyfully. And I'm gonna keep saying joyfully. And those who know me, you know I like to blow these peace bubbles. Okay, I like bubbles instead of bullets. I like bubbles instead of bullets. But there's too many folks who's been out here too long who's getting tired. And they saying, F those bubbles, man. We got to go down there and do something else. And it's not just one way of doing things. There's a combination of doing everything. You know, for the past 2 years, we keep hearing about change happens at the speed of trust. And we cannot build trust if we don't talk to each other. We cannot build trust if we don't say, okay, I'm going to give at least 2 feet. Again, as an urban farmer, as a gardener, there's a place for flowers and trees. Flowers have their season. Trees, man, they go on and on and on. We have to use a combination of stuff. And I'm going to pass it on to one of my fellow speakers here.
So we're talking about breaking silos, having holistic conversations. And I just sit and think about all the different tables, all the different coalitions. And I just think, where is this one great big table where we're all just seated at it at the same time, having the same conversation? And I think that's what we really need. This really great big table. And I'm sure Brother Melvin will reach in that garden and supply us with enough food for that conversation where we can break bread and just have the same discussion at the same time. And so let's work towards that. And at that table, we'll have some jambalaya. We'll have some restorative justice conversation. We'll write a policy that'll be very long. And then we'll give it to Caroline, and she will edit it so well. And all we will need is for us to sign off on it and have all these elected officials push that bill, push those policies. That's going to get us the reparations, that's going to make right the native lands that we sit on and that were stolen. That's going to keep the imagination in our kids' heads. And so I really want to continue to push us to have policy at the forefront of our conversations and to have these honest, open conversations outside of our silos.
Yeah, it's about the policies. It's about kind of the larger vision. And Carolyn, you know, I said I might want to show a slide. Can I give permission just for a second? Because I think this is important, because everyone should see themselves. And this is a representation of certainly what I use as a visual for the folks that I talk to. Can everyone see it?
Yes.
Each one of these organizations, MnDOT, Met Council, City of St. Paul and Ramsey County, all pour tons of resources trying to respond to community needs. And this is what I mean by being in a dark room looking for a light switch, okay? We still have the same conditions. I'm not saying people aren't well-intended. Certainly not saying that people aren't working hard. Certainly not going to say that people aren't building relationships. But part of what I needed to do as a part of my own strategy for the work that we're doing is understand the confluence of their activities, the relationships of their activities. okay, and how that hinders or advances the community. This is a huge proposition. I'm not just talking about Rondo, I'm talking about transformational change. But while we're all having conversations about where we ought to focus, how we ought to get out of our silos, okay, how we need to gather and share, we also have to have clear illustrations that demonstrate success. Both have got to happen, okay, in order to create the inertia. Real example that everyone can look to, okay? Doesn't have to be large, but it has to be significant enough to draw some attention. So again, I agree, we should all be in the tent. But while we're in the tent, we still have to be able to find ways of providing absolute concrete illustration of how it gets done. And each of these agencies, and we can go to our own community, in our own areas, and see exactly how each of the organizations or entities that we all are working with or trying to influence from a policy standpoint affect our well-being, affect transportation, affect health and wellness, affect housing, et cetera, but we don't think about it as this kind of system that has an interdependence, okay? Jurisdictional responsibilities, because while we're having discussions with Met Council, MnDOT's got something going on. While we're having a conversation with MnDOT, the city of St. Paul or Minneapolis has something going on, or Parks and Rec has something going on, or we can go on. I mean, you see my illustration. And I think that part of what makes the Rondo project really unique, but it doesn't have to be, and I just want to be clear about that, is that it understands each of these agencies and their role and responsibilities in transportation. It understands that each of these jurisdictions don't want to make a commitment specifically out loud other than general, yeah, we support something. So it really requires the community's voice to create the bind of these agencies, which also creates the accountability.
That illustration was really helpful, Keith. And as these conversations have been happening around transportation, I've actually heard from, elected leaders, staff leaders about, this transit-oriented development that's equitable hasn't really been done well anywhere. That's an acknowledgement that they say privately, I think. I think it's fair for community to look at the history of transportation in Minnesota, particularly in the Twin Cities in particular, and say, you have never been successful. You have never been successful in ensuring that these investments not only just not harm the BIPOC community, but actually has set up decades of devastation in those communities. So I hate to use the word leverage, but because they have been unsuccessful in providing any benefits to these communities, I think community is in a place where we can, to Melvin's point, we can be bold. And not only be bold and imaginative, a lot of us have concrete policy solutions. We have studied the same data that Hennepin County has put on their website. We know what these communities look like. We know the money they have. We know the resources that they don't have. We have all this at the fingertips. We have the answers. It's just a matter of, why will you not do it? That's where I'm at this point, because I sit at tables with very, very smart people who are here today. I know they are offering solutions. So I think in terms of conversations of how we move forward, it has to be, why are you not acknowledging the harm that you have caused? And why are you not putting in the funding and the investments needed to repair that harm? I think that is what we need an answer to at this point, because if we don't get an answer to that, I don't know how we can move forward in good faith negotiations of how this project moves forward. And maybe that's something that doesn't happen in Minnesota, bold, direct conversation, but I think it is the acknowledgement and then putting up the funds. You can't do it. Policies are not effective without teeth. And we know that teeth is usually money. So if we're going to talk about equity, we need to be, at least I want to be clear that I'm talking about direct financial investments in these communities.
Yes, and I can add to you, sister, that we all know the answer. And it's getting easier every day for people to say white supremacy. Say it with me, white supremacy, okay? I don't remember a time when I'm hearing more white folks telling me that. But it's really hard for them still to say it at those tables. I love that illustration that Keith showed us. But again, that's something from the 70s, something from the 80s. Those who are familiar with People's Institute, they would say all those different systems, that's the way it worked. But there's a foot on us. There's been a foot on the community. And that foot has been what's been, again, thinking they're crushing, but it's just been doing some fertilizing. It's just been building us up. And it's been building the county up. I'm in Rondo. I'm happy to say, if you haven't been to St. Paul recently, walk across the Dell Street Bridge, okay? Rick would love that right now. He could be on his wheelchair with a buddy in a wheelchair, and they both could go on that same sidewalk. But it only happened because the community kept coming together. It probably had been built 4 or 5 years ago. And the community basically said, not this time, baby. Not this time. We're not going to. And it still wasn't perfect, as Keith was saying. Because too often, when that Dell Street Bridge was being built just a year ago, people in the community will look around saying, we don't see nobody. We don't smell nobody who look like us. What's up with that? The time right now, when we break down these silos, or how you say it, Keith, those ecosystems, those ecosystems have to start getting people who look like Denise, people who look like me, people who look like Ricardo in those positions. What happened way too often, when they get in those positions, then they have to just follow the same old rules and do the same old thing. And that's what takes that time period. We need to say, hey, hallelujah, it's a whole new day. A woman, we can do whatever we want to if we do it together. And that's the key. Start right now in 2024 is going to be right around the corner. I know so many young folks right now who voted for the first time last year for the first time, and it made a difference. And there's going to be more Black and brown people in 2024. We can do this. Folks like Keith, who knows the system. I mean, that's the thing. We got people who knows the system, how to use the system, how to benefit it, how to come back to the community, how to help the community to understand that system. To say, they don't really mean to be racist. This is just all they know. Instead of saying, let's look to the First Nation people for answers. Let's listen to our Hmong people for answers. That table, it's not just having a table, man. And thank you, sister, because the farmers, the urban farmers, the Midwest farmers of Minnesota right now, we will feed everyone. And we will feed you with love, and we will feed you with saying, it's about white supremacy. It's about oppression. Black people, brown people, we have to rise. We have to believe in ourselves. We don't have to wait 20 years. And so I think it's time for small group. Is that correct?
That's correct, Melvin.
I want to make just one point that I think is important. I'm probably one of the luckiest people imaginable. Okay. Again, to rest on the history of Rondo and the story and what came before. But I also want to let you know that there are folks that are within these organizations who also understand the systems. But we've got to create space for them to step into, okay, to support our benefits. Okay, we've got to do that as well. There's nothing more powerful than relationship equity. In fact, I would say relationship equity is as valuable as time and money. And being able to leverage them within these systems is very, very important as well. Because there are allies within these organizations.
Great. Thank you, Keith, and everyone for sharing. We wanted to make space for small groups. And I think one of the things that I really heard that resonated with me, I think was Kanani's point about, everyone has a role, and community has been putting forth solutions, and there does need to be a level of accountability from folks within the system to be responding and making those changes real that community is bringing to the table. So I think that one of the things we wanted to discuss in the small groups is really, as we're thinking about breaking down silos, what are the ways that you, in your work, whether that's professional or personal, with the content you've heard here today, what are the ways that you can be a change agent for transportation equity, whether in these projects themselves or seeing your work within that lens of restorative practices around transportation and infrastructure.